Hello, Bobbi Shaw here. Welcome to day 2 of the art challenge. I was looking forward to seeing your artwork on Facebook, and I really enjoyed looking at them. Thank you so much for participating. Okay, so here we're going to do another 3 techniques, and this is my favorite watercolor technique. It's called wet on wet. And it's my favorite technique because it really gives watercolor its uniqueness compared to other paints. And it kind of feels like watercolor comes to life. So this is why I love this technique. So we have, if you're going to be writing your little techniques on your board here, the first one is wet on wet. You're going to want to write that on the top. The next one will be drop color on wet color. And the third one will be called dry brush. Okay, so here's a tip that I forgot to add last time. Here is the palette I showed you last week. And as you can see, this is completely dry. And if this was acrylic, once this dries, you would just have to toss it. It just dried. But the nice thing about watercolor is, even if it dries, you can reuse it. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to put a little water here. And let's do blue. As you can see, you can still use the paint. Okay? So once you have your palettes, if it dries out and you're using watercolor, save them. You can still reuse them. Okay? Okay, so the first technique we're going to be doing is wet on wet. So what you're going to do is I'm using pretty much a medium-sized round brush this entire time today, except for the dry brush technique, which I'll be using your liner, which is the skinny brush, okay? All right, so wet on wet, you're going to, once again, wet your paper. There's a reason why they call it watercolor, isn't there? All right, and you're going to take one color. Might take a minute because it is dry. There it goes. You're going to just drop some color on. It doesn't really have to be anything. You can even add more. And then this, and then the next side, you're going to add a different color. Okay. I'm going to grab a bigger brush, actually. And then I'm going to drop some more color on there. This paper, honestly, is low quality. I had to sit in someone gave it to me. And so if it's wet enough, this paper does not seem to want to behave. So I'm going to use a bigger brush. The watercolor paper I'm using for my examples and stuff is a lot better. There we go. So you have wetness here, and you put in color, and then the two colors are like you're just letting it go and letting the water flow where it wants, and the colors will just kind of merge. That's called wet on wet. Okay? Kind of like not really glazing. It's just, you don't really control it. You just sort of let it go. Okay, now I'm going to stick with a bigger brush just to wet this spot. Now this is drop color on wet color. I am making a mess. Look, I'm even have drops of water everywhere, but that's okay. I'm going to take this green. I'm going to put a wash of green. Then I'm going to take my small brush here. I'm going to take another color. Let's go Christmas. I'm just going to drop color right on here. Anyway, it will bleed around and mix. And that's what you want. Okay? So you have wet on wet, drop color and wet color. Now, dry brush is exactly what it sounds. You're not going to even really add water to the paint. So you might want to add a little water just to get your brush a little, mine's kind of, but you don't want it dripping wet. Mine's kind of, so just a little, you don't want it, it's not even dripping. And you don't want to really add much water to this paint. So here it's wet. I'm going to use where it's not so wet, it's more concentrated. And I'm just going to make some just strokes. Why they call it dry brush is because you're not using much water. Why would you use dry brush? This is for any detail you want to add that you want control for your painting, okay? That's dry brush. All right, again, wet on wet. Drop color and wet color, which is one of my favorites. And dry brush. Okay? So, for example painting, I'm actually going to do one full one. I'm going to give you some other examples because you can do a lot with this. But the finish is some jellyfish. Okay, this is a really good practice for you for this technique. So I'm going to just move this over. Okay, so first you want to get a pencil. Anything will do. And you're going to sketch like some half circles. It can be any, you don't want to be totally uniform. You can just spread them out because it makes it look interesting. Okay, I actually drew them a lot darker than I should because I wanted to show in the video what shape to make, but ideally you want to do this pretty lightly. You don't want to see it. As you can see on here, you can barely see any pencil marks. But for this video, I wanted to show you what to draw, okay? All right, so what we're going to do is I am going to do on these little half circles some wet color dropped on wet color, okay? So you can use any color you want. I'm going to just go with the same color scheme as this because my paints are out and that's what I have. So I'm using a small round brush because this is a lot smaller area. So what I'm going to do, I'm kind of going to do like a wash, a wet wash on this one. And I might not even cover it all up. I might do like some highlights. Now this can be messy. It doesn't have to look like really anything. This is just the technique. This is kind of I guess kind of an abstract painting. It's not going to be like really detailed for this. And then you're going to just take some like wet blue. I'm going to add right on there. And since if it dries out, just add some water. And it's going to kind of swirl. And you want it messy. Then what you can do, which is sort of like a wet on wet technique. I'm going to take here, I lied to you. See, I'm going to use this now. I am going to, since it's wet, I'm just going to drag a little bit down. And I actually had some color on here. But that's okay, because it doesn't matter. But I'm just going to kind of just dry the color out a little bit. Okay? Same thing on the next two. I'm just going to use different colors. See this? I'm going to do some blue first. Just have fun with it. You don't, just slap some paint on. And let's see what to do. I'm going to use there's my son playing video games. Sorry you had to hear that. Walking around. Alright, I'm going to add, I like this green better because it's more bright than the one I just used. See, it's messy. You don't have to, same thing. I'm going to draw this color out. And if I can, I'm going to make it run into the neighboring jellyfish. and repeat. So we have this little guy down here, which I'm going to use green. And I'm going to put red on top of that and make this a Christmas jellyfish. And like I said, you can just take your brush, dip it in water, and pat it down. And it will I don't know if you can see it, but it will just run in all interesting ways. And it kind of makes your art, does the work for you. And last, I'm going to drag it down. So you're going to have something that looks somewhat like this. It's going to be very wet, so you're going to have a lot of time for it to dry before the next step, which is why I already pre-made one, so you don't have to sit and wait an hour with me talking to wait for this to dry. So up here, as you can see, I already did it. It's a big mess, but you can see like the different, see how that just formed the different interesting shapes, and just gives it kind of an interesting look. I love that about watercolor. So now we're going to do the dry brush technique. So you're going to take your liner brush. I'm going to use the same color as well. It's really matte, but originally, you know, this was supposed to be mainly red, and I'm going to make jellyfish tentacles, or whatever you call them, stingers, or things you don't want to touch. And have fun with it, just like kind of. This guy's going to be over here. I'm sorry if I'm shaking it. I'm trying to do this one-handed, and the camera might be moving around a little much than I like. Okay. I can probably go a little farther down. You see, they kind of run into each other, which is kind of what I wanted. And the last guy is green. I can even make the tentacles or whatever. I don't even know if that's what it's called, so sorry, science people. But, yeah, you can even go outside the color. Okay, now I'm going to highlight each one, same technique, dry brush. It just gives it a little bit outline. I'm just going to take whatever color you want and just do some outlines just to make it. You can even follow the outline where the watercolor naturally went. It's hard to look at the camera and look at what you're doing at the same time. Make sure it's lined up. So I apologize. I will get better at this. And then this almost has a highlight. Look what I'm going to put look at the watercolor kind of just made my highlight for me. So I don't only have to do that some. I'm just going to do a little bit over here. Okay? And you can add more color or whatever. But this is just a good exercise to learn the wet and wet technique and dry brush technique, because it's detailed, but it's not like really, really like, you know, it's not like you're trying to draw an eye or anything. So that's what you will start to look, and then that's what you'll end up as a result. Now, there is different ways to use wet and wet technique. I want to show you two more examples. So I'm going to switch work here. I'm going to put you down and show you some other things to give you more ideas of what you can do. All right, I'm getting the big guy out. Alright. So what I have here, I just have just a big paper here. I decided to paint flowers. Let's say you decided to paint flowers, and you did it in detail here. the good thing about wet and wet, one of the techniques you can use, if you're, for instance, painting a field, and you want this to be like in a field of wildflowers, but you really like these flowers, and you want this to be the focus of attention. If I sat here and I painted every stem, every leaf, every wildflower, it's going to take away from the 3 original ones that I want the viewer to see. So what you can do is a wet and wet technique. So you can fill in this with green, but keep the main attraction right here. And if you see, I also kind of sketched some back wildflowers, that's just a guideline, because I'm going to try to leave those areas wet to just give an impression that there's more. So that's my goal. And I'm going to use different kind of greens. This is just an idea of why you use wet and wet technique. All right. See if I can do this one-handed. So I'm going to just paint water. I'm going to paint water again. This is one of the first times I used wet and wet technique, was actually a daisy painting. And so I'm just going to dab some color randomly. I'll show you why. I'm just dabbing. I'm going to use 2 greens. Well, why not? That's a bright green, yellow-green compared. I'm going to take a big brush and just dab water on it and see where it goes. You can even splash it up, make like kind of like impressions of your other like stems coming up. It's whatever you want. So here, I see I got like some flowers here. I'm going to paint around. And just kind of give the impression. I'm not even going to do exactly the flower shape, but I could a little bit, just to give the impression there's other flowers there. Now, I try to be careful not to actually paint. I might just like try to manipulate this around the finished piece of the flower so it doesn't cover it. Okay? And then afterwards, with a dry brush, or even when it's still wet, because you don't want detail, you can just kind of add some like blurry stems. And this is just, I will work on this a lot longer. I'm just trying to show you. I'm going to have pictures again. I might even have fun and stick like a stem sticking out or whatever. Okay? And of course, you'll probably have a sky and everything. But that would be a reason why you would do a wet on wet technique. So, to have a focal point. And you don't have to do, like I said, like water theme, like jellyfish. You can do flowers. Here is another one. Here's an apple. You can even do it on fruit. Just, it gives more of an abstract expression than being exact. Some people that use watercolor will literally paint it like it's a photograph. I've seen amazing watercolors where each brick of the building is like perfect, and it's like almost like it was just a photograph. And that's, it's such talent. But I like art to look like art personally. If I wanted a photograph, that art that looks like photograph, I just get a photograph. So, you know, you can just do like shading. You know, I'm just playing around. See, I wet. Now, you don't always have to wet your paper. Like I said, you can do some detail with watercolor also. Let's pretend this apple is not ripe yet or whatever. I'm going to put a little green in there. I'm just showing you what you can do. You can even go crazy and kind of put like a little shadow or whatever you want to do. Here's with a dry brush. You know, if you want to do a stem and okay, and here's a quick example. Now, excuse me, I am going to be posting some artwork for examples because you don't have to do what I do. But if you want to see a great example of a wet and wet technique, there's this artist, and I'm going to write her name on here. Google her. She is phenomenal when it comes to the wet and wet technique. It is, Sonia. I hope you can read my writing because I'm notorious for bad writing. Right, Sonia Parks. That's Sungaparks. She does wonderful kind of landscapes as buildings, and she'll put detail like windows and part of it, and she'll wet and wet the rest of the building. It looks like it's like flowing away. It's really cool to see. So look her up. She also does some portraits. So she uses the wet and wet technique really beautifully. So, all right. So here's your homework. If you choose to accept, pick a inspiration photograph. Try some wet and wet techniques first, and then take your photograph that you would like to paint, or even a still life around the house, and use some wet and wet techniques and post your artwork, and so we can all enjoy and comment how wonderful it is, and or even if you have questions for some tips. All right, I'll see you next week. All right, have fun this week with your art.